Do you think ancient Asia was all about tranquil gardens and beautiful tea ceremonies? Think again. Stay in to learn about some very cruel practices that were once thought to be quite normal. Why do small feet never get lost? Because they can always find their little way. For that reason, ancient China was always focused on small feet. Ancient Chinese foot binding dates back to the 10th century and involved girls between the ages of 5 and 8 having their feet constrained with fabric strips, curling the toes and breaking the foot's arch. The target? A 3-inch lotus foot. Just brutal. Unfortunately for these young girls, this painful activity was considered beautiful and socially advanced. Small feet were associated with femininity and elegance, and bound feet were linked to prominent marriages. Many families bound their daughters' feet to protect their futures, despite the tremendous agony and lasting disability. It was seen as a rite of passage, expression of family dignity, and crucial to a woman's identity. But unsurprisingly, it also strengthened their dependency on male family members due to their limited movement. Not much of a shock if you ask me. I mean, how could you do anything on those tadpoles for feet? Thankfully, the Chinese government abolished the practice in the early 20th century due to societal changes, health knowledge, and protesting. So don't panic if you're a young woman in China, your feet are staying just the way they are. Samurai. The ultimate warriors of ancient Japan. Strength, cunningness, lethal, and a boatload of loyalty. Seppuku was the ceremonial suicide used to avert dishonor and prove this loyalty. To guarantee a rapid and noble demise, the samurai would literally disembowel themselves with a short blade or katana, and had a trusted second, or kaishakunin, decapitate them. You'd think cutting your guts open would do the job, but nope. A beheading just to make sure it was done. Now, seppuku was generally conducted to restore one's honor after a war loss, or atonement for failure. It was shockingly public and very ceremonial, showcasing the samurai's code of honor and morality, and even requiring wearing special clothing for the event. It was a true image of a samurai's devotion to their masters and willingness to live their code. Talk about job commitment. As Tom Cruise was the last samurai, nobody else practices this today. And we're sure even Tom Cruise would never try it, despite all the crazy stunts he pulls. While foot binding may sound awful in ancient China, we think that human sacrificing takes the cake here. From 1600 until 1046 BCE, the Shang dynasty used human sacrifice in religion and politics, so basically everything at the time. It was thought that the practice may speak with the gods and ancestors for good harvests, military victories, and wealth. Not sure about that. So how did they pick their sacrificial lambs? Well, it was generally prisoners of war, slaves, and the lower class. Shock. They were chosen to accompany aristocrats and royals to their afterlife, to safeguard and serve them, assuring their well-being and influence. I mean, just imagine being a slave all your life, then being executed just to do the same job all over again. Absolutely brutal. Some of the rituals were shocking. Decapitation and being buried alive were just some of the few methods used. Mass burials with sacrificial victims and priceless items were even found at sites like Anyang, proving the existence of this horrifying practice. But the Shang believed the spiritual and earthly realm were just interconnected and thus necessary to sacrifice to satisfy the gods and ancestors. I guess there was just no messing about with ancient Chinese dynasties back in the day. Practiced by northern Filipino tribes, headhunting was more than just a dismal combat ritual. It was a core of their culture and spirituality. A warrior's ability to secure the head of the enemy was the ultimate sign of bravery and a rite of passage for young males in the tribes. The severed head was considered to possess a potent spiritual energy that would provide fertility, wealth, and protection from bad spirits to society. So naturally, successful headhunts were celebrated with elaborate rites and festivals. So instead of lanterns, kites, and balloons, it was human heads on spikes at these parades. And they weren't just discarded after the celebrations. Warriors actually brought them home to put on display as a sign of prowess and to deter attackers and invaders. Oh, and ghosts too, because just about everyone believed in them in ancient Asia, it seems. Over time, headhunting declined with modernization, colonialism, and Christianity. It became a banished practice, labeled as barbaric and a barrier to indigenous community absorption into modern society. So basically, the governing authorities finally came to their senses, because barbaric is certainly an understatement. But don't worry, because today you'll only find headhunting on LinkedIn, if you're lucky. Remember Romeo and Juliet, where they can't stand being apart from one another, so they end their lives to be together in the afterlife? Well, sati in ancient India certainly draws a few parallels, maybe just except for the part where it wasn't very voluntary. Widows were expected to sacrifice themselves on their late husband's funeral pyres. Yeah, literally burning alive. This was seen as an honorable thing to do, as it was believed that a woman's life was inextricably tied to their husband's, and the ultimate showing of loyalty was to join his demise. And thousands were forced to commit this deed, mainly due to religious and social pressures. Yeah, not something that would be too accepted in these days. And of all the brutal reasons it could have been banned, the government finally decided to put their foot down because it was just cheaper than printing caution and hot labels. Of all the reasons, that was it. I'm actually speechless for once. The world is just a better place with gender equality. At least you won't find yourself being pressured to cook yourself on a wave of hot flames. Soko Shinbutsu. Let's all try and say that together. Soko Shinbutsu. Or, if that's too hard, self-mummification, as it was known, was a severe form of Buddhist self-discipline for Japanese monks. For almost 8 centuries, monks in northern Japan performed this practice. The goal? Achieve enlightenment and become a living Buddha to guide followers in the afterlife. And this practice started well before the actual demise. The monks would eat a tree consisting of nuts, seeds, fruit, and bark to help promote decomposition, and even drank a semi-poisonous tree sap tea to further the mummification, helping the eventual corpse drain fluids easily. This is easily the most environmental method on our list. And talk about the Japanese temples achieving a great carbon footprint while they're at it. And the diet before mummification wasn't even close to being the most brutal part. Once they were buried in a little stone grave, all they had was a tiny air tube and a little bell to ring to signal their survival. Once the sound of the bell stopped, it would signify a successful mummification, and the tomb was then shut for good. But after 1,000 days, it would be opened and the mummified bodies were brought to the temple to be honored. Like all the insane practices, it was eventually abolished, but still considered very significant to Japanese culture. Temples to this day still honor them for their ultimate sacrifice for spiritual development, and is certainly one of the more extreme cases of how far spiritual dedication may go. People just love to be remembered, it seems, and so do we. So click on that subscribe, and we'll see you in the next Conquering History video.